Episode 37, the Photime Podcast. We're going to talk about buying your second handy talkie. The ins and outs and more coming up.
AmateurRadio15.com presents Photime, the other ham radio podcast, sponsored by Main Trading Company. Find them online at mtcradio.com. Now, here's your host, Cale Nelson, K4CDN.
It is episode 37, the Photime Podcast. I am your host, Cale, Kilo 4 Charlie Delta November. Sincerely appreciate you being here. Yeah, 37. I'm a little older than that now, but not much. And 36 was a great year for me as well. And it was a great episode for you, undoubtedly, because it's just an amazing response that we've received from the listeners of the Photime Show regarding the D-Star show with George and Jeremy. They did an outstanding job, and I'm still kind of in shock and awe. Maybe it's just me. You guys like them better, but the response was phenomenal. We've got a lot of questions, a lot of comments, a lot of big thumbs up, and people just saying, thank you for answering those questions I've always had about D-Star. And matter of fact, we're going to talk in a few minutes about how that particular program actually influenced a purchasing decision for our guest on the show today. Now, how cool is that? So anyway, it's a lot of fun to do this program, and whether it's me or them or whoever is on the show, we're excited to do it for you, and it's always a lot of fun. We do this every other week. It's the Photime Podcast. You find it online at photimepodcast.com, and we've got a whole library of shows that you can listen to. And you may want to go back and listen to some old ones. You may want to send us some of your ideas for some upcoming shows. We'd love to hear from you. We love hearing from our listeners. And we're actually going to have one of our listeners on the show tonight, today, tomorrow, whenever you're listening to this program. You know, I don't know where you're at or when you're at, but we're going to have one of our listeners on the program that we've been wanting to have on for a while. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But first, I got to tell you, this portion of the Photime Podcast is brought to you by the ICOM ID51 Alpha Plus Handy Talkie. This 5-watt dual-band D-Star and GPS-enabled handy talkie offers all the features you're looking for, and even some you didn't realize were available in an HT. From its IPX7 submersible rating, voice recorder, Android tethering, and more, this feature-laden handy talkie deserves a look. And you can find the ICOM ID51 Alpha Plus at mtcradio.com today. mtcradio.com. Just getting over this insane collapse of computering responsibility around here. I'm still recovering. I can't get my old Thunderbird out, and I'm having a time with that. I've got a lot of my files back. You probably heard Christy in the intro. You'll hear again in the outro. Thank goodness we were able to salvage that. But, man, I'm telling you, not backing up stuff is not a very good idea. So Cale's going to be doing that in the next couple of weeks. Just want to say thanks again for you guys listening, participating with the show. Thanks again to George and Jeremy for carrying me the last time. And a big thanks to Ed. Ed Bradshaw's coming up here in just a minute. His call is Whiskey 4, Echo Delta Fox. Ed is a Coastie, and he resides in the nation's capital. We've talked about having Ed on a couple of times. He's one of Jeremy's buddies. He's done some videos with Jeremy. Ed's really into antennas and stuff. But he emailed me a few weeks ago and said, Kel, I got an idea for a show. What do you think about this? And I liked it because it addressed some of the things that I necessarily had just kind of given up on, forgotten about, was not going to concern myself with, and that is a higher-end handy talkie or maybe a second purchase handy talkie. And I just want to bring Ed in here just a sec and hope you guys enjoy the program. I'll be back in a few. Again, thank you for listening to the Photime Podcast. Folks, with us we have Whiskey 4 Echo Delta Fox. That may sound a little familiar to you if you've seen Jeremy's videos from Field Day 2 years ago. They were using Ed's call, and because it was the shortest one they had of the bunch. Ed, welcome in to the Photime Podcast. Finally, nice to have you here with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Guys, Ed is a Coastie. Is that how you say that? Is that the correct terminology? Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for your service, Ed.
Well, thank you. Yep. Spent 8 years as in the Coast Guard as a marine science technician.
Wow. See, that I can't even spell most of those words, but we appreciate your service there. And again, thanks for coming on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We've got your call, Whiskey 4 Echo Delta Fox, which sounds really cool when you say it phonetically. Tell us a little bit about you being in the amateur radio.
Let's see. I have been a licensed ham for 3.5 years. Ham radio is something that's sort of always been around. I mean, not that I've had people that I knew directly that were involved with ham, but as a kid, when I'd listen to, say, shortwave, I was always fascinated by hearing people talking, or even just AM radio. And at night, you get at dusk when you start hearing some of these stations from far away. I just got this love for that magic of what's coming over the airwaves. And then, of course, as a young kid in the 70s and 80s, having access to a Heathkit catalog, not the money to buy anything in it, mind you, but at least, I'm sitting there and just sort of dreaming of all these cool gadgets and toys that you can get out of Heathkit and seeing some of the ham radio. But it took a long time before I actually became a ham, mostly because I didn't directly know any hams, or there was no one really to kind of help bring me in. And it was almost 4 years ago, I was at the Science and Engineering Fair in Washington, D.C., and I'm walking around, and I happen to see this area where there are little satellite models around, and it was the Amateur Radio Satellite Group. And the question came to me that I'm sitting there, all right, amateur radio, no money. How do you get a satellite up in? How are they doing that? So I sat there in the crowd, and I asked the guy. I said, "All right, how's that work?" And when he told me how they do it, and really how the amateur satellites are essentially packing material for the real satellites, or the big money satellites, that is what hooked me. Is I heard that, and just that idea of can't even think of what the term would be, but I really found that fascinating, and I wanted to know more about amateur radio. And at that point in time, I reached out to a club. I happened to reach out to one of the members of W4HFH, which is the Alexandria Radio Club, and they told me about they were doing a test. I got the books, read up, and I think I crammed for a couple months. Took the test. I passed my technician, and they gave me the second test that evening, and I passed the general, and the rest is history.
Fantastic. Speaking of up in that area, that's where you met our good friend of the show here, Jeremy, who was on just last time with George doing the D-Star show. You and him kind of that's how you became friends, was through the amateur club. Is that correct?
That is correct. As a matter of fact, I really can claim Jeremy as my first real Elmer, because I went to a club meeting before I'd taken the test, and he was kind enough to tell me about various study materials and some online sites that really helped out. And a couple club meetings, and I are hanging out a lot. He lives only about 2 miles away from me, and as he's mentioned multiple times, he didn't have a really good place to do radio. I have a nice big front yard and a big tree, and so I'd invite him over to set radios up in the front yard, and he and I would just around with antennas and make contacts and just chat about radio.
Cool. It's nice to have some folks to play with sometimes, even as adults.
Exactly. So, and of course, unfortunately, but fortunately, I'm very happy. He's now moved to Ohio, and so there we go. So it's just me out in the front yard with the radio. We talked about having you on the program. We were going to talk antennas, because you've done some great work with some antennas that, and we'll list those videos that you and Jeremy did together when y'all were hanging out up there in the Capitol. But since that time, you've been real busy with work,
and job, moving, what stuff like that. And you came across an idea for a show. And folks, this is what I love about our audience. They listen to the program, they get inspired to do something in the hobby, even come up with a great show idea like you've hatched here, Ed. Tell us a little bit about what you want to talk about today on the Photime Podcast.
Well, today I wanted to talk about HTs, your handheld transceivers. It's usually, as a ham, it's typically that first radio that you buy, and of course, when you're buying it, it's always that one radio you really don't know much about. Especially as a new ham, somebody just tells you at the club or says, hey, just go down to the store or go online and order this particular handheld and whatnot. And, having done that myself, I think my first handheld was the FT60 from Yaesu. And, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to look for. And so the idea was, as I've used handhelds, I've purchased some others over time, and just recently purchased the ICOM 51 Alpha Plus. And as I was using it and comparing that to my experience with the other radio, I thought it'd be really kind of interesting to talk about what some of the features are, what you're looking for when you look at some of the features on a radio. What does it really mean? What's it going to get you? And some of the other philosophy, I guess. So it's sort of an opinion piece, but at the same time, I hope it kind of helps spark some thoughts as other people look for an HT.
Well, the simple answer nowadays is just when people tell us they want to get into the hobby, the first thing that they're told immediately is just go buy the $35 handy talkie from Amazon. It's good enough to get you started. Yep. You'll probably toss it in a bag anyway in a couple of months and move on. And I can't say that that's the worst advice to give someone, but it may not always be the best advice, especially if they really want to start out with a nice quality rig.
Exactly. Now, let's see. It was about 3 years ago when I got my license, and the radio that everyone was suggesting was the Yaesu FT60. Seems to be the go-to HT as far as the we'll say of the more general HTs. I think at the time some of the more inexpensive Chinese radios had just been starting to show up at the ham stores. So and it's a great radio. It's a really good radio. It's built like a brick. Unfortunately, it's the size and weight of a brick too. And there are a number of things that over the years and having used some other radios that I've realized it's probably now one of my least favorite radios. So it is an HT to get on to your 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Yeah, well, it's fantastic. But could we do better? So that was my thinking.
We recommend a lot of folks, we recommend the FT60 coming in over the Baofeng or the Osheen or something, if nothing else for the simplicity and the ruggedness. But as you progress in the hobby, simplicity and ruggedness may not be exactly what you're looking for.
Right. And I would even say that to an extent, the FT60 isn't necessarily the most simplistic. But I think that probably holds true for a lot of radios. The thing, and I'd say my latest philosophy for an HT is this. I want a radio that I'm going to want to use every single day. And that also includes carrying over beyond using it to talk on a repeater. So I want a radio that gives me some extra features so that every day I'm using this radio, one, because I spent the money on it, I don't want to just spend $100 or $200 on an HT and then throw it in a bag and use it every now and then. I want to spend a couple $100 and use that radio all the time. And and we're not always going to be on the repeaters. So what else can the radios do?
Gotcha.
And so things like weather radio, which a lot of myself, and I know a lot of people, probably listeners, are folks who like to do ham radio outdoors, and having weather information is really important. Yes, we have our cell phones, but sometimes we're not necessarily in the range of a cell phone, and weather radio is really handy. And as well as FM broadcast. For one, just for news, and two, it's if you're out camping, it's nice to have an FM radio that it's all inclusive. I don't have to carry a separate FM radio if I want to listen to the radio. I don't have to carry a separate weather radio. It's all right there.
Yeah, you can listen. Like yesterday, I was helping my brother-in-law do some work, and we were listening to the Gamecocks play on the FM radio on the Oshin HT.
Yep.
And we didn't have to have a boom box in there, whatever we call it nowadays.
Exactly. And you might think, all right, well, that's kind of trivial. It's not that important. But again, because I use that radio every day, I'm now familiarizing myself with how to operate that radio, how to get from the memories to the different the broadcast reception to various things. So that was my thinking, that I want certain features that are going to make me want to use the radio more, which as a result allows me to become more familiar with the radio, and the radio becomes more useful.
That's something I haven't even considered, Ed. Be very frank with you. That one point there, because I despise using my handy-talkies. Well, a lot of it has to do too with I live way far out, so even with our excellent repeater system, it's still hard to get in with a handheld from where I live. So I finally got me a really nice mobile, the Kenwood TMV71 Alpha that I'm just loving, in the van, the Millennium Falcon. And that's what I spend the most of my time using. But if I had an HT that was more fun to use, more intuitive, more user-friendly, I really believe that I would probably keep it with me, because now I never really even had. I took it with me yesterday so I could listen to the ball game, but by and large, I came out of the fire service. I worked in the fire service for almost a decade years ago. We always had handy-talkies, or we called them walkie-talkies. It was part of your uniform. You had it with you, so when you went into a fire or any emergency situation, you had communications. But I got away from that, and I'm not used to wearing that or having that anymore. So leaving the house and taking a handy-talkie with me doesn't make sense to Kel anymore. But I think that you just nailed it. It's because it does nothing for me.
Exactly. And so as an example, there are a lot of repeaters in the DC area, and so during the commute time, you get a lot of people talking on the repeaters. Well, I actually took the Metro for up until just recently. I took the Metro to get to the office. So I couldn't get on the repeaters during the commute because I was underground. So having a mobile rig, that made no sense to me. I would spend about 10 minutes a day in my car. The rest of the time I was either walking or I was taking the train.
Right.
And but I ended up getting the VX3R from Yaesu, a little tiny radio. I mean, the thing's the size of a box of Tic Tacs, pretty much. And it has a lot of really interesting features to it. It has your AM/FM broadcast reception, has no weather radio, but it also let me monitor stations outside of, including the Washington Metro rail channels. So I could actually listen to the radio and listen to what the dispatchers and the person running the train were talking about.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So where that came in really handy a couple times is we'd have an unfortunate incident may occur. In one time, someone was struck by the train at the station that I was heading to, and over the loudspeaker of the train, of the cars, they were saying, all right, well, if you're heading here, get off, transfer to the next train, and go around the other way. And I was able to listen in and hear about that time they had just started letting the trains through. And I knew I could sit still and be at my station sooner because that was going to end. But so I was privy to some information that was not give over the loudspeakers, all because I had an HT, a ham radio HT that did more than just let me talk.
Yeah, and in that metropolitan area, you have a lot to listen to, even outside of, like you said, amateur radio. You've got the transit authorities, probably some of the taxi services if you wanted to go there. Maybe some of the emergency services. You know, Dan Romanchik's been on the program before. KB6NU has the tremendous blog and does the no nonsense study guides.
Right.
He told us on the show, Kel, I don't even have a mobile radio. I don't even drive. Because he lives in Ann Arbor, and he can walk anywhere he wants to go, and there's so many repeaters there. He just takes his handy-talkie with him, and he's a happy guy.
Exactly.
Living 30 minutes from everywhere, it's hard to think like that, but, not everybody lives in the upstate farmlands of South Carolina. You're right there in the midst of everything, and a handy-talkie is absolutely perfect for you.
Yes.
And the X3R is just, like you said, it's so tiny you put it in your shirt pocket and people think you just got a really long ink pen in there or something.
Yes. And one of the nice features of that, which I will say, here's one of those comparisons, and I can get into some of these more in a bit, but one of the comparisons, and another reason why I got the VX3R was, so I have my headphones on for, because I'm usually listening to music on the train going back and forth or podcasts. And with the VX3R, it actually has a headphone or earphone plug that you can plug your headphones in and listen to it right there. So I could, because I think one of the things I always felt a little self-conscious about was, pulling out this big HT with the big antenna on the train and even though people keep to themselves and pretend to ignore you, I'm sure they were probably looking on, what in that guy doing? So I wanted to keep things as sort of low key and on the down low as possible. So having that was handy. If you were to plug the headphones into your into the FT60, it actually keys up the mic and starts to transmit. So that was one of those little things, and that was the reason I didn't carry the other. That's why, if I had the one, I ended up taking the other. The other was the size was really nice. I could keep it. I could just have it in a pocket. I could keep it in my bag, kind of like a EDC type of a situation.
Right.
And having that for EDC is really handy. Was about 4 or 5 years ago. Unfortunately, prior to me getting my license, we had the earthquake, and for the most part everything was okay, but transportation was just at a standstill. The trains had stopped, and of course everyone's trying to rush out after that delay. Wow. And having the radio would have been handy. My cell phone wasn't working. Everyone was using the cell towers, and so it was overloaded. So there was nothing about it. The power was there, the infrastructure was there, but because everyone was using it, trying to call home and find out what was going on, it was just impossible to do that. If I had that little radio with me, I'd have been able to listen to the news, and here again the reason for having the FM. I could listen to the news, hear what's going on, find out if there were any closures. Does it make sense for me to grab a cab? Do I chance walking across the bridge, or the bridge is open? I could listen to the repeaters and hear what folks are saying there, and hear what the other hams would be saying. So again, that kind of goes back again is having that a useful HT goes beyond just using it for me to talk on the radio, but is just a nice little alternative for getting information, especially in an emergency.
And it's a minimal cost. I mean, granted, it's not a $30 rig, but it's less than $130 for the VX3R, and
it is.
That's a nice little radio. I had one of those pre-ham days, 1999, and never used it. I used it, well, for what you're using it for. I listened to the fire service. I monitored the fire frequencies. I listened to the AM/FM radio when I was on shift and board. But, I wasn't licensed, so I couldn't do anything. Guys, what we're talking about here is handy talkies, maybe your second handy talkie, where, and we read this online all the time, people have just had it with their Baofeng. Now, there's a lot of people that love them, and we're not here to beat up on them in this program. That's not what this program's about. I actually have, I think, 6 or 7 Baofeng 3Rs. I have 4 Oshin 2D, 1D, and 6D models. So I've got my fair share of Chinese handy talkies. That's not what this program's about, beating up on those. But we're going to talk about why we would want a little nicer model, or why we would want a nicer model. We're going to talk about some of those models. Ed, you broke down some key features of some things that you would want to see in a handy talkie that you probably wouldn't find in your bare bones $29 Amazon Prime special. You want to go through some of those?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest one, and this kind of ties into the VX3R, because this actually does not meet this requirement, right, is having 5 watts on internal battery. Now the VX3R is 1 to 1.5 watts, and you can do as much as 3 watts, but you have to use an external power supply. So that's one thing to keep in mind as you're looking for a radio is, if it says, this will do 3 watts, make sure that it does 3 watts on its internal battery. And that can actually change as well when you talk about the AA battery pack, which is a common thing for a lot of HTs. And I think I believe the Icom, the Icom 51 Alpha does not do 5 watts on the internal battery pack, but I would have to double check that. So ease of use is the other. Is I don't want to have to carry the manual with me, though from using some of the Yaesu radios, I've kind of had to keep the PDF on a phone or my iPad to keep around with me, but it's not necessarily practical. It was just, and as I was reviewing and preparing for this, I had was looking at the FT60, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. It does do weather radio. Well, how do you get to weather radio? And on the FT60, it's you press this button and that button. On the VX3, it's press this button and that button and whatever to get to the radio. On the Icom 51 Alpha, you just press the memory button, and each time you press it, cycles through your different memory modes. One of those is the weather. Wow. It's really simple for me to do. And so I don't have to have a manual with me, and it's really quick for me to get to what I want.
You don't have to have a PC either.
And
plugged into it.
Exactly. Well, and actually, and that's the next thing. So, the biggest thing, and I'd say the thing that I always would hear, you buy the radio, and it was always this thing. It's like, all right, you're going to buy that HT. Oh, they're a bear to program, and you need to get the cable and all this sort of stuff. Like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. Now, fortunately, there's some really good programs out there. Unfortunately, for us folks who use things like Macs and Linux, we have fewer options. So RT Systems is probably the go-to that everyone always mentions for programming software. I've never used it because I don't use PC. Now, I actually have, for all my other radios, I use the Chirp software. It works really well on Mac. It works really well on Linux. I don't know how it works, so I can't really comment on the PC, but I do know that it does run on there. It has a lot of great features as far as it will allow you to import some of your repeaters from like RFinder if you happen to be a subscriber to that, and some other great sites. So you can pull in all the repeater information, and you can copy and paste all your repeaters. You can copy and paste from one radio to another. So I actually can copy and paste my repeater information from between all three of my Yaesu radios. I've got the 817, the FT60, and the 3XR. And even though they are programmed differently and some of the way in which they list the channel names, it still works really well. So that programming is handy, but it would be nice if you didn't have to use a computer. And one example, and I found this purely by accident and by necessity. So, and I was talking to Jeremy, and because I just a week ago I purchased the ICOM ID51A Alpha Plus, and he said, get the RT system software and the programming cable, which adds, by the way, about $50-$60 to your purchase. And I got all that. And I ran the software using Wine, because that's the option that I had, and it didn't work.
Wow.
And I was frustrated. And turns out that ICOM actually gives you a CD, and in there is software that allows you to do programming as well, specifically for that radio. Didn't have to pay a thing, came with the radio. The only thing I didn't have was the cable. But the 51 Alpha actually uses a micro SD card. That I took a micro SD card, I popped it in. Well, first I had to format it on the radio, easy as pie, because there's a menu. You go down, you press the menu button, you go to SD, and then in there's format. So I formatted the card, popped it into the computer, opened it up, and with that, I had all the features of the radio, all the memory. I was able to add and import CSV files. I was able to change the bank names to what I wanted them to be. I was able to actually turn on some of the features. Saved that to the SD card, popped it back on the radio, booted it up, loaded the card, and my radio was programmed.
That's fantastic.
No cables, nothing. So to me, that right there, that's so if you're looking at a radio and if you say, well, this is a little extreme, but if you say, well, that ICOM radio is $60 more, maybe it's $100 more, think that I don't necessarily have to spend the $50 to get the programming cable and the software, because it's already going to come with it.
And we're begging the big three to give us some innovation. That's pretty innovative, to put an SD card like we're used to using in our smartphones, our cameras. When we used to have cameras, but to give us that option, that I didn't realize that. That's pretty sick. Now, is that only the Plus model, or does the anniversary edition also do the same thing, or do you know?
I do not know specifically. I believe it does, because I do know the 51, just the straight 51 Alpha, had the SD card as well.
Okay.
Now, what features it does, that I don't know. Again, I'm very new to the ICOM radio.
Right.
But I will say right now it truly is my favorite, because again, a lot of these things that I'm talking about of how easy it is to go through the different features of the radio are just right there and very simple. There's a lot of I'll call them drop down menus, and that makes a huge difference when you're trying to program.
Especially when you're new, you're just trying to get your feet wet into the hobby. Hey, we'll be back in just a couple of minutes with Ed. Ed Bradshaw is going to continue to talk to us. It's Collis Whiskey 4 EDF, and we're talking about HTs. Maybe your second HT, you're looking for something to upgrade where you started. We'll be back in a minute right here on Photime Podcast.
Hi, everybody. It's Christine at Main Trading Company in Paris, Texas. We just want to take a moment to say thanks to all of you guys for your support throughout the years. 6 years in business now. After 4 different locations, the addition of our very own post office, ham radio, and local honey just seem to go together. Main Trading Company, celebrating 6 years in the ham radio business. Thanks for all your support.
This portion of the Photime Podcast is brought to you by the Kenwood THD 72 Alpha Handy Talkie. The D72 is a full-featured dual-band handy talkie with a built-in GPS and an APRS TNC. Use it as a standalone digipeater for APRS, or even connect to your favorite Echolink node. The D72 will fill the voids in your handheld radio needs, and you can find the D72 and the rest of the entire Kenwood product line at mtcradio.com, mtcradio.com. We're back with Ed. Ed is Whiskey 4 Echo Delta Fox. You know, the cool thing about that call is Echo, Delta, and Fox are all really easy to say. They may not be single syllables, but they are really easy to say. November, it seems like it takes forever for me to say November with my call. Echo, Delta, Fox. I like it, man. Ed, thanks again for being with us.
Yeah, not at all. My original call sign was, if I could even remember it, KK4JQR. It would Kilo 4 Juliet Quebec Romeo. By the time I would get done calling, if there'd be a pileup, by the time at a contest I'd be calling on, putting my call sign out there, the guy, he'd already be in the middle of writing down the information from the next person that he got. So,
yeah, those vanities are nice.
They are.
Vanities are nice. And I've got some friends of mine. I'm not going to call them out on the air because I know they listen sometimes. I wish they would get vanities because their calls are a mouthful, and two of them they tested the same time, the same day, and they have identical calls except the very last letter of the suffix, and even it sounds like the other one. So one's an E, one's a G.
Oh, that's
yeah. So that's a lot of fun. But anyway, back to what we're talking about. And these are some of my buddies that use HTs a lot. We're talking about HTs. We've been talking about HTs. Talking about some of the things we're looking for in a replacement or a second or maybe a higher end HT than we started with when we first got licensed. We've talked about the Yaesu FT60. We've talked about the VX3R. We've been talking in and out about the ICOM 51 Alpha Plus, which is your newest addition to the stable. Let's keep talking about some of the things that we might want to consider. Maybe we haven't considered because, like Kel, we never use our HT because we just hate having to deal with it. What are some of the other features that would probably be something for us to look forward to if we're shopping for a new HT?
Well, let's kind of continue on the programming where you talk about the memory. So the radios, I found that there's kind of a very broad range of ways in which radios handle memory, either the number of the available memories that they have and sort of what features you have. What I like to see in a radio is to have a group feature for my memories, which allows me to put, because I'm in the DC area, but I'm originally from Pennsylvania. My family's from up there. When I go up to Pennsylvania, I want to have my second set of repeaters. So I have all my repeaters in a second group. And then I've also got other channels as well. So I'm a mile from the Potomac River. Across the river is the National Harbor and former Coast Guard. It's just sort of habit. It's kind of fun to listen to the maritime channels, and so I like to have those in there as well. It's just more or less just pure entertainment than anything, and I can have those in a second group as well. And where having the groups are handy is a lot of radios that do the groups allow you to scan within the groups. And that's really nice because I can have a group of just repeaters and I can scan repeaters and not have to worry that, oh yeah, got, someone's calling on the maritime channel. As well as I don't necessarily want the radio to be zipping through repeaters that are, 200 miles away up in Pennsylvania. As well as when I'm trying to dial in. So having memories are really handy. Being able to label those memories and label those groups are really handy, more or less because I don't always remember that, memory group 2, that is my, that's my Pennsylvania repeaters or, my MCOM group. So that's one of them. Again, I think we talked about the AM/FM broadcast and the benefit of that. Wideband, that's the other one I wanted to talk about. So you see a lot of stuff with wideband, and there's wideband is everything from, all right, this will do the 110 megahertz on up to the 999s. That's handy for listening to, if you like to listen to the aircraft bands, as well as some others. But you see a lot of radios, and the VX3R happens to be one, that allow you to actually monitor all the way down into the lower HF frequencies. I can monitor 40 meters. However, there's a bit of a problem with that, in that I still have a little tiny antenna. And as cool as that was when I first bought it, and I thought, oh wow, that'd be nice to be able to sit out at lunch and listen to some CW, or listen to the 20 meter bands, I never could pick anything up. And the same thing goes for the shortwave bands that happens to be on that radio. As a matter of fact, it has built-in memories for shortwave channels. At best, I could probably pick up at the 15 megahertz, where you'd have the time channel, and every now and then, if the band was just right, you could hear that, and that was kind of cool. But it really turned out to be one of the features that it initially I thought would be really cool, that turned out to be not really as handy or useful. So again, sometimes those extra features really don't add much.
Well, Ed, could you, if you were so inclined, take a long wire out in your yard and connect it to that, and you have your shortwave receiver? Let's say you're a tech wanting to get your general, but you don't really know what you're missing, or you want to listen to some shortwave. Can you connect an external antenna and make that a little more propagation friendly?
So you could, however, the other really aggravating feature in that, when you start looking in those bands, is when you turn the knob to change the channel, you're going by, say, a 5 kilohertz steps. So you're not actually you're not tuning. You're not really tuning,
right?
And so again, that was one of those other things. Is yes, if you could get on the exact frequency that someone has to be, but it really turns out to be more frustration than it is anything. So.
Now you mentioned maritime frequencies. What about air frequencies? I know some of these higher end handy talkies will receive the aircraft frequencies. Is that anything you've ever done spend any time with?
As a matter of fact, in fact, a lot. I'd say not even the higher end. The FT60. Let me go back on that. Hang on a second. I could be wrong. No, I don't think the FT60 does, but definitely the Icom does, the 51 Alpha. My office is within eyesight of the Dulles Airport Tower, and my house is in the flight path of the National Airport. So I can actually get aircraft all the time on it, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge sort of airplane guy, but again, it's enjoyable. Sometimes I would consider it somewhat of a morale builder.
When the repeaters go dead in the afternoon, between 8 and 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it gives you something else to listen to.
Exactly.
Okay, I got you. Now, batteries are like the silver bullets for handy talkies.
Yes.
I found that out just the other day. I got the handy talkie out. I wanted to use it to listen to the radio, and the battery was dead.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about battery. I know we got some different chemistries and different setups. We've got externals. We got battery trays. We can put AA's in. I've actually got an old ICOM. I think it's a 7 or 7D that runs off AA's, and it's just in my get home bag. I just leave it in there with some end loops and trust it'll work for me. That's really the best handy talkie I've got. I never use it, but it's a really nice, really easy to program old handy talkie. But let's talk about batteries and battery management for handy talkies.
Yeah. So, and this is one of the things, and I think this is probably, as I talked earlier on, why the FT60, even though sort of being as venerated as it is really one of my least favorite HTs. And it's because, number one, it uses nickel metal hydride battery. which means you're going to want, unlike the newer batteries that we're used to with our cell phones, you're going to want to use the battery up to the point of, to where it says to charge it, and then charge it, and then use it again up to that. So you're almost stuck in this cycle of, oh, it's not ready to charge yet, I need to use it a little bit more, which can be really frustrating if, you get home and it's got too much charge to really, for you to charge it, yet it's not enough charge for you to make it the next day. And that means now I got to carry a second battery. The other is batteries like that actually don't hold on to their charge over a long period of time. So if you have that go bag and you have your radio, you've charged the battery, you pop it in, and as you said, you go back to it, it could be dead. And that means now I've got to think about, all right, well, every month I've got to make sure my battery's charged in the radio. I mean, not a bad thing to do, but it adds to that
something you're going to forget.
Yeah, it's just exactly, it's something you're going to forget. Conversely, the VX3 that uses lithium-ion batteries. It uses a common lithium-ion battery that is found in camcorders, which means I was able to buy, what was it? I think it was a pair of them for $18.
Wow.
I'd charge those up, and I've carried the batteries and that radio in my day-to-day sort of EDC bag that I carry just to and from work. And I think it was a year, and the batteries were still held a decent charge. And that's really kind of handy because, that radio is not a radio that I used a lot. It was more or less, I liked the size that I could keep it, and it was there when I needed. And I didn't really have to think about it. You pull it out and, hey, I've got charge, as well as the extra batteries. They're also very small and light, which is another thing.
A lot of the handy talk is when you want to buy a spare battery, you wind up paying a third of what another radio would cost you just to get a battery.
Oh, yes.
So that's something to factor in this as well. And like you said, you found an alternative, which is always great.
and that's it. And I have found alternatives for some of the other batteries. Now I'll kind of just keep that. Because I've not actually tried them out, I don't necessarily feel comfortable recommending, hey, go out to this place and get. But they are out there, and maybe we can come back later with a report on that. But another thing is, so you talk about the charge, the FT60, and again, I don't necessarily want to sit here and turn this into a just beating up on that radio. It's a great radio. It's just the radio that I have experience with, so I can speak specifically to it. And so I think these are things that, as you're looking for an HT, that you're going to want to look at and see if this is the same for the one you're looking at. But the FT60 doesn't really have very good charging features, in that they tell you not to leave it on the charger for longer than, say, 8 hours or whatever the time is. And that means, boy, don't forget it, because you could damage the battery, at least according to their documentation. And that is a frustrating thing, because again, now with the nickel metal hydride, I have to sit here and, well, I can't charge it now because I'll damage the battery. I have to use it some more. And then when it is time for me to charge, I have to charge it for only a certain amount of time because the radio is not smart enough to stop charging. As an example, the VX3, you plug that in, and when it tells you what it's doing. It tells you what it automatically will shut off once it's filled the battery up. It also has an indicator on the front that tells you, as you're using it, it's got the little bars that we're all used to nowadays. And so as I'm using it, I know that my battery's starting to get low, which is that I think is huge. The FT60 doesn't have that. It does let you look at the voltage, but you either have to turn the radio on to see that, or go into the memory and zip through that whole thing just to see if you want to turn it off. So that, and again, there's just more of those sort of little frustrating things. It's not at the end of the day, it's not something, that on its own isn't necessarily a bad thing. But as you start to talk about all these different features and you put them all together and you start to paint a much larger picture. The ICOM, the 51 Alpha Plus, has a really interesting feature in that it only charges when it's turned off. When you turn it on, it then uses the external power. So if I have it plugged into external power, it'll run on external power when it's on, and when you turn it off, it will charge. But that can be changed in the menu, and you can tell it, I want to also charge while I'm using it. So there's a case of you have two options now. And so one might work better for you. So you have some extra flexibility.
It's that's another thing that people may tend to forget or just not even be on their screen until they really need it. But the capacity to charge your radio in the car or to power your radio in a vehicle, it saves you from having to buy another radio, number one.
Yes.
It keeps your battery top so that when you do get out of your vehicle, like it's say in MCOM situations, perfect example. You use your HT, it's charging till you have to get out and start calling back into net control. Do you have vehicular chargers or vehicular battery adapters and whatnot for your rigs? Because I try to keep those for the ones that I have, and they're not easy to find, especially for the Chinese rigs. Some of them work well, some of them don't. But some of these higher-end rigs, I'm going to have to assume that they're at least available for purchase.
Yes, and I do. Because at least up until just recently with my new job, I've not had a need to have a mobile rig. So I actually, if I want to have a radio in my car, it's right now going to be my HT. And so what I do is I have in my car is my the 12-volt adapter plug, and that plugs into my radio and allows me to charge it. Now, and here's a perfect example of that is different between radios. So the FT60, I think they recommend not using the external power for actually using your radio, that it's purely to charge, which means now if I'm going to have it plugged in, I'm not going to have it turned on. Mm-hmm. So, if it, at the minimum, I just want to drive around and listen to who's on the repeater, I can't really do that, at least not according to sort of the ASU manual. Now, I have used the ICOM while it's been plugged in. I'm not necessarily sure what the specs. I haven't. Sometimes I'm a little bit. I kind of like to push it a little bit, and I know a lot of radios. They say, well, that's just for charging. It's not for operating your radio. But at least, especially from these adapters. But I do, and I've had good luck so far.
What other? You sound like a Yaesu guy, and there's no problem with that.
Yeah.
And you, I think that you're finding a lot of love in this new ICOM rig that you've got. Have you spent any time with the Kenwood TH Delta 72, which is their dual band with APRS and GPS built into it?
I have spent afternoons with that. That was always the HT that up until recently I was sort of. It was always on my list of, oh wow, I really want that one, because I like the idea of the APRS. I like the fact that you could plug it in. It had a USB connection, and you could send data over your laptop, which again, a great bit of use outside of just using it to talk on a repeater. So yeah, that one is actually a really nice radio, and I've known some people who've had it and had a chance to mess around, but not a whole lot.
I think Gerald's got one.
He does, as we used for the field day not last year, the year before last, 2014. We actually set his HT up to Beacon APRS. It's one of the points you can get for field day.
Right.
So we had his HT was beaconing APRS.
Cool.
And it was a really nice. It's a really nice feature. So again, and especially if APRS is your thing, I know that there is a bus driver. He works for the Metro Transit Authority here in DC. Never met him, but I see him on the APRS site all the time. The map, and he actually, as he drives around his bus, you can track the bus as it's going on the route.
That's cool.
So it's one of those things.
Yeah, and his wife can text him over APRS if she needs him to bring home some milk or something.
There you go.
If she's licensed.
Exactly.
Let's talk for just a minute about our previous program, which it really struck a lot of nerves in a very good way. Now, sometimes you can say that struck a nerve and mean it bad. The previous program we're talking about, folks, is the D-Star show that George and Jeremy spent with us this last time. A tremendous response on that program. I don't think we've had that much response since we did the Dayton show, which was hugely popular. But I know that Jeremy's inbox has just been flooded with folks, and thank you guys. We like hearing from you. We like the encouragement. We like to converse and hear your thoughts on the programs that we produce here on the show. That show was huge. The D-Star show was huge. Now, for me, D-Star is going to be tough. There's nobody around here with it. I don't have enough bandwidth to do it myself, so I'm still kind of a few years separated from that. But Ed, I think since you listened to that, did that affect your choice on this new ICOM that you just purchased? Did that have anything to do with it, or had you already picked it up?
100%, 100%. I've known Jeremy since actually before I was a licensed ham, and I think he had D-Star early on, and the club that we belonged to also had D-Star, and so it had always been around, but I never really saw much reason for it, much thought for it. After that program, and I listened to Jeremy and George talk about that, I was absolutely hooked. Because I think they made a lot of good points, and I know there are a lot of people who think that everything from the extreme of, well, D-Star is not ham radio, and that's an argument for another time. But since I've had this radio, and I've connected to some of the reflectors that are out there, I've listened to more sort of DX conversations, just rag chew between. I listened to a guy who was in Wales talking to a guy in Australia. Another guy was talking to someone in Poland, and I heard more conversations, more interesting conversations, and just more general that sort of level of ham radio on D-Star than I have ever on HF. HF is great, and this is, again, I don't want to get into what's better, because there is no better. It's just there are a lot of great avenues in ham radio. But HF, at least so far that I've seen in my short time as a ham, a lot of times you get up there and it's just, all right, I'm gonna. What's my signal report, and you get through, you exchange a little bit of info, and you're on to the next person. It's really great to hear people talking, and I've yet to actually talk to too many people, but I'm looking forward to talking to people in other countries and talk about ham radio, or just general conversation.
Right. Have you used any of the System Fusion repeaters at all? Because I think that you've got some up that way, don't you?
We do, actually. We've got a couple, and I'd say at the time, this was right before. I'd say right before the podcast. There was a point in which I was thinking, all right, I want to do a little bit more. I'd heard about System Fusion, and I looked at that. So it was kind of on the fence of where I wanted to go. And again, after hearing what I thought was a really compelling argument from Jeremy and George, that I decided with the D-Star. But
so ICOM can send them a commission check on your behalf.
can. They can. I would say at the end of the day, they're probably very similar technologies. I'm sure that each has some merit, but the biggest argument was, well, there's a lot more infrastructure and a lot more other additional things that you can do today with D-Star. It has nothing to do with the fact that, the D-Star is no better than System Fusion necessarily. It's just the fact that D-Star's been around longer and more things have been out there.
Right.
So, for instance, I built, and it did not take, it was not very terribly expensive, with it was $150, they got the DV Mega Board and an existing Raspberry Pi. I now have my own D-Star hotspot that now runs up in my in sort of my man cave / ham shack. I hooked that up to my external antenna and was able to walk around the immediate neighborhood listening to D-Star. So just a fantastic things that you can do with it. So I really like that.
Well, if you're new to the program, you need to go back and listen to the episode previous to this one and enjoy the conversation with George and Jeremy. It was quite enlightening. Again, it was probably top 5 most popular programs we've done yet. I don't really know what that says about the show host when he wasn't involved at all, but we'll just leave that right there. I do want to touch on something though that Ed, I just made you aware of as we were going on the air here.
Yeah.
This was the new, it's a PDF of a page from the latest QST magazine. That's the magazine that the ARRL produces. This is from the November 2015 issue, and it's on page 75. And guys, I just threw this at Ed as we were going on because I just got it earlier today. And it's basically a breakdown of ARRL laboratory testing of handheld transceivers that they've done over the last 5 years, 2012, 13, 14, and 15. A lot of these, again, this isn't a beat up on the cheap Chinese handy-talkie. Kel's got at least 6 or 7, maybe 8 10 if you count my Oshins, which are the higher-end cheap ones. But anyway, if you look at this table, Ed, you see the big 3 listed on there. They're virtually 100% compliant. Kenwood stumbled in 14. Yaesu stumbled in 13. But past that, they're right on the mark. You look up in 2012. This is right after I was licensed. The Oshin was 100%. That was when the Oshin was the cheap one of the day. Now, guys that are brand new in the hobby, you're getting to experience a $35 handy-talkie as your first purchase. When I first got licensed, $120 was cheap. When George got licensed, they used rocks hitting together to make sparks and smoke. I'm just kidding, George. But they were very expensive. So looking at this here, I've got it in front of me. I hope that you can see it there, Ed.
Yep.
You can see that from 2012 to 2015, the lower-end brands, the cheaper brands, the Amazon Prime handy-talkies that are all the rage right now, you can see that apparently, according to the ARRL testing here, that their quality has not improved over the time that they've been involved in this testing, which is kind of disheartening.
Yes. As a matter of fact, it's dropped quite a bit. I'm looking right now for 2015 with Baofeng being 25% compliant. And Oxon being 86%, where your Yaesu, ICOM, Kenwood being 100%. That's a little troubling. And kind of something to look at. I'll have to look at the numbers, and what I'm kind of curious about is, when we're talking about maybe the Baofeng radio, which, wow, in 2012 we're seeing 31% compliant with Baofeng.
Yeah.
That's something else. But is it the same model? Is it new? Is it newer models? That would be a really interesting thing to see.
Right.
But yeah. So there again, there's another
thing to look at. And, when you start to look at a radio, and I realize not everybody has the money to sink in a $350 ICOM radio. Fortunately, the ICOMs, and the reason it took me so long is they were just, I think it was $500 at the time that Jeremy was getting them, and that was just way out.
Yeah.
More or less, and more or less that number really came down to, well, that's $500. That radio had better do a lot.
Yeah.
For me to make that investment. And so you might get a $35 radio, but keep in mind that there's some other things that may not don't necessarily compare when you start looking at, let's say, the $100 radios, which I believe the FT60 and some of the other sort of entry level of the big three are in that $100 range.
Yeah, and that that's one of the great things about the influx of the Chinese brands is that it really drove down the pricing on the consumer end. Whereas I purchased my Oshin, was the cheapest I could buy back in the day for $120, but I can almost touch that now with an FT60. I mean, it's within $20.
Right.
And that's, for a dude that's just getting into this and he really doesn't know what he wants to. Ham radio is something, if you're not surrounded by it, you really don't know how you're going to take to it, And that's why we try to introduce all these different aspects of the hobby to give folks an idea of what they can really do with the hobby and what they may find themselves interested in once they get here. They may not want to spend $150, $250, or like you said, $380.
Right.
So, in my case, it took me, I was licensed almost 5 years before I could finally get the money together to buy my mobile radio I wanted. And I'm thinking this is a 65 watt. You can do APRS with it. It's dual band, dual VFO, dual monitoring. It's just a great rig. Would I want to spend that much money on a 5-watt handy talkie? I still can't justify that right now, but it does. This discussion has shown me that I may be missing out on a lot of things by not having something a little higher end, a little bit nicer than what I do have. And again, not to beat up on what you have, listener. If all you have is a UV5R that you got for $25 and you're happy with it, we're not dissing that. We're just saying there may be some other choices as you mature in the hobby that you may want to investigate and kind of see what you're missing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing. I probably would still, although now that I'm seeing some of these numbers with the compliance, that I might actually change my thinking is, you're a brand new ham, you just got your technician license. It doesn't necessarily make sense to go out and buy a really expensive HT because you really don't know if this is even a hobby for you. But once you're sure that this is what you want to do, that's when you can definitely. I think it's good to start considering some of the other things and that this is a bit more of an investment and can kind of give you access to some better features, or at least, again, as I talked earlier, of to make it easier for you to use this radio every day, and encourage you to do such.
One of the things we didn't even talk about, of course, Gerald's not here to really explain it to us, but I know that with his Kenwood handy talkie, he can talk back into his TS2000 and remote control his TS2000 with that handy talkie. That's pretty awesome.
That's another thing. That's another thing I did not bring up. Now, I actually own the one of the Kenwood HF radios.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. It's actually become the. It's like every time I'm listening to the podcast, it seems to get brought up. But I've got the TS480 SAT that I purchased from Jeremy. And the one thing I've yet to do is actually set up a remote with the Kenwood radio, mostly because I didn't have the Kenwood. But that was as I was looking to do my purchase, that was one of those features that I had thought about. But I think at the end of the day, again, the D-Star was kind of the thing that I felt would be the most useful. A lot of it was, I could actually now get back on the radio with Jeremy and he and I could talk. And I thought that was kind of a cool feature.
Yeah. Hey, and speaking of that, I'll stop right here for just a second, off topic completely. But just the other day on the Echolink server that Baynet has allowed us to participate with for the Photime podcast, we had listeners. We had Brett from Louisiana. We had Tim from California. We had George on there from California. And Rick, who was on with the scouting episode a few shows back from South Carolina, like an hour away from me. We've still never connected on the local repeaters. We were on Echolink, and we had a great QSO. But, having the capacity to do that with your handy-talkie, with D-Star, walking around just hanging out during your lunch break in the metro area, that's gotta be something really cool that would encourage me, if I lived closer to something like that, to purchase something that I could use.
Exactly, and I think that is kind of a great thing, and actually, if I can again kind of take it a little bit of a side here, talking about a lot of these digital modes, like D-Star and System Fusion, a lot of the things that you hear as a kind of a negative is, well, what happens when the internet goes down? You lose all that. Well, as far as the HT going to another HT, you're still doing the digital mode between the two. There's no need to have the internet. Between the HT and the repeater, you're just doing the digital mode, and to the repeater to other HTs that are in there in that digital mode, there's no need for the internet. Now, if I want to link to another gateway, if I want to link to a reflector, that's a different story. But another podcast, and I think this kind of was the other reason that I definitely decided to jump to D-Star was, and if you don't mind my mentioning the Linux in the Ham Shack podcast, and as a Linux user, that's another one I listen to.
That is a fantastic show, by the way, guys. If you're not listening to it, you need to listen to the Linux in the Ham Shack podcast.
And the program to listen to, and we can put it in the show notes. They talked with a gentleman about Hamnet and using ham radio and these old Wi-Fi routers to set up a mesh network using the ham bands. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, I don't necessarily need the internet. I can do D-Star and link up a mesh network of my own and build my own D-Star. So it's just, if that's one of the things is you're thinking, and kind of going from this being an HT talk to another D-Star program, but it is something to say that, number one, that is ham radio when you can start using these other technologies with the ham bands to build a mesh network that then you can use a D-Star radio that uses a combination of radio and networking, and and this could be set up in an emergency situation, and certainly something to think about and listen to, and gives you some new ideas.
Absolutely, and we're going to have we're working on right now a Ham MeshNet show, so that's coming up pretty soon. And it's funny, for that last thing you said about using radio and networks, I come from a background of telecom. My dad worked for Ma Bell his entire adult career, retired 36 years of service with Bell South, AT&T, whoever. Used to be Southern Bell. But anyway, Dad spent years working in the CO, and I can remember when they were swapping things over, and they brought hard drives in that were as big as 55-gallon drums, that were like one half of a gig. It was ridiculous, but they were huge. Here recently, my brother-in-law, who is in telecommunications now, has been asking me to help here and there, and now it's all network. It used to be we had network cables and we had phone cables, and we pulled one kind for one and one the other. I remember we pulled coax at one time for computer networking, but now it's all the same. And just as telecom has changed over the last 20 years of just my involvement in it, ham radio has changed. And we can't sit here and worry about an EMP taking out our infrastructure all the time. I mean, we need to be prepared for everything. Don't take that as a disregard of preparedness. But if we only focus on those things, we'll miss out the enjoyment on the other things. And right now, while we have the capacity to use that type of technology, I say we run with it and have a great time.
Oh, exactly. And there are any number of things that can happen. And I didn't necessarily get into ham radio for the MCOM side of it, but it is, again, a fascinating, it's an interesting area to talk about. But I found that things like the derocha that we had, and actually that happened within months of my getting my license, and all the power was down, and that's enough right there. You don't have to have some zombie apocalypse to to worry about. It's the things that do happen. It's the fact that we nearly had a hurricane come through here. Fortunately, it stayed far from us. Unfortunately, you all got hit with a lot of rain. Yeah. But it's those things. It's the more common sort of day-to-day disasters that happen, that some of this technology, though you might think, all right, well, networking and the internet, we can build our own network. Exactly. And we can connect it with ham radio. And so, a lot of this technology, though 90% of the time I'm going to use it to talk over the internet and chat with a guy in Europe just to chat. It still doesn't mean I can't use it in these emergency situations. And once more back to some of my earlier thoughts with HTs, and this really applies to every aspect of the hobby. So the more that you use it, the more that you're encouraged to use it. Be it that it's just fun to do. I have something that I have a radio, and there's something that I can do with it every single day. The more that you do it, the more familiar you become. And when those times happen, when you have to respond to an emergency or something of that nature, you're ready for it. You don't have to specifically say, all right, I'm going to, once a year have a training exercise. It's every day is my training exercise. Yeah. So that's why, definitely find features in a radio that you're going to want to use outside of just talking on the repeater. Now, I'm granted, if talking on the repeater is all that you want to do, that's it. But definitely, that's my thought.
Well, Ed, we appreciate you coming on. I know that we've talked about having you on since, very first. When Jeremy and I connected, he's like, "Oh, you got to meet my buddy Ed. You love Ed. Ed's great." And some of the antenna stuff you've done, we still want to have you on a chat about. And I know that you and Jeremy would have a lot of fun with that. I thank you for coming on and chatting with me about this because, I don't have those radios. I can't fund that right now, but it does give me an excuse to say, you know what, maybe I need to. Maybe think down that road. Maybe that would be a nice feature to have. Maybe we can get D-Star, for instance, if we had enough people here in the local area to get one of those running. Maybe I could even get a DVAP or something one day when I finally get some great internet connectivity down here. So it's something to look forward to, and having this conversation, I think, has definitely changed my outlook on it. And I hope that, and I'm sure, I should say, that it has some of our listeners. Again, this hasn't been a beat-up session on your particular brand that you like the most. I mean, we've talked about the big three here because the big three offer the most features. That's why they call them the big three. And you can even look at some of the Alinco radios, not to discard those guys, or disregard them rather. They make some really nice radios as well that maybe aren't as feature-laden, but they've got some with some odd combinations of frequencies. If you like the really high bands, they've got some dual banders that would probably attract you as well. So, Ed, again, thank you for coming on and chatting with us and sharing with us your time, and we hope to have you back on the show again soon.
I hope to be. Thanks a lot.
And again, a big thanks to Ed Bradshaw, Whiskey 4, Echo Delta Fox. Now, we have an addendum down at the bottom of this about some of the charging that we kind of talked about on one of the units. Ed addressed that through the owner's manual. So make sure you check out all the show notes at photonepodcast.com along with the video links. Yep, we got the videos up of Ed, so not only can you hear him, you can go watch him in action at Field Day a few years back. And as he explains this really cool center insulator for an antenna he developed, it's really sweet. So make sure you check those out. Photonepodcast.com is the show website. Don't forget, on that page at the very bottom, on today's episode page, there's a link if you want to catch out one of the brand new Photime logo t-shirts. They are available right now on Teespring. You click the button. Yeah, I've got a large array of colors to choose from. So if you want girl colors, boy colors, or just olive drab cool colors, make sure you click on one of those today. Pretty inexpensive. They're making them some really nice tees. It's American Apparel stuff, so check it out on Teespring. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for shopping with the Main Trading Company, mtcradio.com. Their specials are still going right now on those HF rigs. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to the International Podcast Special Edition show, and Richard tells you about the sick deals he's offering on some of his rigs right now in stock. So if you're looking to buy an HF rig, don't miss the opportunity there. That's about all I got to say, guys. I'll be back next time, and I've got a really couple of interesting shows. I don't know which one's going to come in first, but I'm working with 3 or 4 different people, and I'm really excited about every single one of them. So make sure you come back. You check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, all those places. Share this with your friends. Let's spread the news. Let's go into 2016 on fire. This is K4CD and 73, y'all.
Thanks for downloading, listening, and subscribing to AmateurRadio15.com presents Photime, the other ham radio podcast. You can find our past episodes, web links, and more at AmateurRadio15.com. That's AmateurRadio15.com. Follow us on Twitter at Photime Podcast, and remember to visit our show sponsor, Main Trading Company, at mtcradio.com. Till next time, 73s.